And welcome back in to another episode of Fourth Down in the Steel City. You know my face. I'm Chris Mack. You know the other face on the other side of the screen. That's Josh Taylor. There is an interloper between the two of us, however. Welcome in from Baltimore, Jeremy Conn of 105.7 The Fan and the Big Bad Morning Show. Before he tells you why you should be worried about the Ravens coming to Heinz Field, I'm never going to call it Acrisure Stadium here in just a moment. Let me remind you that you need to subscribe to Fourth Down in the Steel City. And whether you're getting it on YouTube and tapping that little notification bell below our faces here so that you get reminded when new videos are available, or you're getting the audio-only version and you're following or subscribing to the podcast, however you get your podcast, hopefully, most likely, inside that free Odyssey app, AUDACY. Make sure you're doing so there, leaving some ratings, reviews, comments, whatever, and we will get you ready now for what is the classic AFC North matchup, Steelers-Ravens. Again, Jeremy, thanks for making the time, man. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I just don't know. Am I close enough to my camera? Because I don't know if you guys' heads in Pittsburgh are bigger than mine, because I have this watermelon up here on the top of my shoulders, and it just looks like your guys' heads are bigger than mine. So I'm like, leaning, do I get in closer, or how do we make this work?
That's because we have to be smarter in order to make sense of whatever our coaching staff is trying to doing and what our players are up to on any given week. So we need more gray matter.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. That's what I'm going to go with. Anyway, let's start here. It looks like that the Ravens offense is getting healthy just in time for this one. How much should Steeler fans be worried that it's not going to just be Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews? We might get Odell. We might get it looks like a number of pieces back for the Ravens this weekend.
Yeah, there's a bunch of guys. Like I saw the Vince McMahon meme out there where it's like he's getting excited, and you see how much more excited he gets, and it's like Odell's coming back and Humphrey, and yeah, so like Keaton Mitchell is another guy that we're interested here as far as the running game goes, but like the other names are more important. Marlon Humphrey coming back, as these guys have practiced a little bit more this week. Some of the names you heard were limited, some practice in full. Getting Ronnie Stanley back. Yeah, they've had some key injuries. They should be 4-0. The coach's fault for not calling a timeout and changing the fair catch against the Colts as they put a few seconds on the clock. But getting healthy now, you just wonder how much better can this offense get. The defense has looked really good thus far. There's been some bend, don't break. But now that they're healthier and figuring out some of these pieces and even like kicking the tires on a Kyle Van Noy and bringing him in, and he actually has a pretty good game. So I think the defense is really good, and the offense, once they figure it out, Zay Flowers is special. For anybody who hasn't watched him, I know everybody's talking about him now, but there's a lot of similarities. I'm not calling him Tyreek Hill, but in their games, there's a lot of similarities there. So I really like it. It's finally weird to talk about wide receivers on Baltimore and not be just bashing them, but there is some talent here, but they still, look, it's the NFL. If you guys have been watching it, like I've been surprised as much as any fans or anybody out there week to week going, what the hell's happening here? Like, what are coaches doing? I don't need to tell you guys in Pittsburgh, but like, you start watching things and you're like, what am I actually watching here with what's going on? And, with the Ravens, they should be 4-0. I think people should be talking more about them, but they had the hiccup against the Colts. And, I can give you all the cliches with the Steelers matchup. You throw the records out and we see what happens. And I really feel like the game's still going to be that way, but it should be a fun one come Sunday.
You mentioned Zay Flowers, and Mike Tomlin had a lot to say about Zay Flowers, and obviously he got a good look at him playing at Boston College while someone's playing there, so of course he's going to see a lot of close. But sticking on the subject of this Ravens offense, and we kind of talked about a little bit before we started this recording, but we talked about what this offense used to look like with Greg Roman, but now Todd Monken has taken over. He comes over from Georgia, not the only team to bring in a guy from Georgia in the offseason, but Todd Monken comes over from Georgia, and this offense looks a lot different. Lamar Jackson's getting results out of it, and we already talked about how the Greg Roman era used to look because Baltimore fans kind of look at the Greg Roman era, probably how Pittsburgh fans look at the Matt Canada era right now. What's the difference been? Like, how is it really black and white, the Technicolor, or is it a little bit more not as clear to see?
Well, I think people had some questions initially, like especially if you watch the first half against the Colts, you're going, what is this offense? But they've also had some injuries. I mean, we were talking about how great the wide receiving core is and finally having a plethora of guys that you feel like you can rely on. And then last week, they don't have Odell Beckham. They don't have Rashad Bateman, who both of those guys have practiced this week. We haven't seen anything from Bateman yet. Like, it's kind of alarming where you're going, hey, this was the guy that had the fastest touchdown last year for the Ravens when he took that slant to the house. There's talent there. Just wondering how do they mix it up. I do think we've seen a difference in the offense and philosophy, in some of the blocking schemes and things that we've seen, but also passing. They made a conscientious effort in the first 2 weeks to get Zay the ball, and his targets have been there, but we haven't seen them push it down the field as much. We've seen a couple of those places, Zay, but realistically with Odell coming back, Zay there, we want to see them kind of take some chances down the field. They have the offense now. They have the speed to do it, to stretch it and set up other stuff, even if they're not completing those passes. But I have seen a difference. And even something just as simple as what we talked about before the show, the play calls coming in. Last week wasn't the greatest, as some of the things were a little bit later than we would have liked, I think. But Lamar last year under Greg Roman was getting play calls in at like 5 seconds or getting to the line. He's got no time to change a play. So now he does have that opportunity. So, and we'll see. We'll see if he's making the right decisions. But I do think Lamar reads the defense way better than people give him credit for. And I think that's been one of the benefits of just having Giro out and bringing Monken in.
Why have the Steelers been Lamar's kryptonite in the past? It's the only team in the league that he's played at least 4 times that he doesn't have a rushing touchdown against. It's the only team that he's played multiple times that he's lost more to than he's won more against. The only team that he's got more picks than TDs against. It's weird. It's a very weird thing. I mean, to the extent, Jeremy, it didn't make sense at the time, but you had some numbnuts in Steelers Nation who this offseason were like, oh, that's bring him on back. I'm happy to see the Ravens bring Lamar back, which is just insanity because you can see how impactful he is and that he is the engine for this offense. But why has it not worked for him against the Steelers so often?
Did you just call Pony numbnuts? Is that what just happened?
Was it that obvious? That was referencing Pony?
No, man, I love Pony. But, it's hard to say, why this is. Like, sometimes it is about matchups. Maybe they defend him better. Because I'm watching the games, I don't necessarily – when you throw those stats at me, I don't think about him and saying, oh, my God, Lamar's had some struggles against the Steelers. And you realize, hey, he hasn't had that rushing touchdown. He hasn't looked like he has against other teams. Like, people would say it about Cincinnati, and I'm like, well, he doesn't have a problem with them. Cincinnati had a really good year and beat the crap out of the Ravens twice, took them out behind the woodshed. But, there's not that same vibe there. And maybe the hatred and the rivalry starts or they figure out some things about Lamar. But, yeah, the Steelers really have done a nice job. TJ Watt, I'm wondering what it looks like now when Lamar has a little bit more free reign with the offense and he can change plays. Because the one thing the players and the teams have said, when he changes a play at the line of scrimmage, they get really excited because, again, the guys believe in him. They buy into it. And I think Lamar's a way better player than people give him credit for. If I'm the Steelers, I'd rather see Huntley or anybody else if they were going to draft a rookie quarterback and go through that motion again. I don't know how you guys feel about Pickett, but, it's kind of hard to look at it. When I look at him, I go, is he given a fair chance in this offense? But I just kind of feel like he's a guy when I watch him play. I see some good things, don't get me wrong, but is he just another one of those guys, a flash in the pan kind of? Can I compare him to some of the other quarterbacks in this league that really haven't done much? Or am I not giving him enough credit because Matt Canada's got a handcuff on that offense and it's not fair to even criticize him that way? So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I don't know why they've done such a good job against Lamar, but they have. They've done a fairly good job of keeping him in the pocket and making him a passer. Now, with the weapons they have, is that going to be a bad thing now? We will find out on Sunday.
Jeremy, you mentioned Kenny Pickett, so let's shift over to the guys that Kenny Pickett's going to face with this Ravens defense. Now, the last time the Ravens came to Pittsburgh last season and they faced Kenny Pickett, Patrick Queen, it came in on a blitz in the A-gap, and Kenny Pickett wasn't in the game anymore. Now, he's walking into this game with a bone bruise on his knee, and he says he's going to try to gut it out. But guess what? Patrick Queen and the other linebacker, my name
Roquan
escaped me there quickly. Roquan Smith, thank you. Both of these guys are still on that defense. And Mike Tomlin talked about just how good these off-ball linebackers are and how the tradition changes or continues for Baltimore, how it hasn't changed, how the faces changed, but the tradition for good off-ball linebacker play hasn't. When you think about this particular group, and we talked about how good the offense has been for Baltimore, but this particular group, even with the addition of Kyle Van Noy and some of those injury issues and maybe even getting, a guy like Humphrey back, what kind of play from this defense has been different and how much of it has been the same from last year?
I think it's kind of the full season from Roquan. He's the guy that changes everything, in my opinion. And with all due respect to Mike McDonald, I do love the Doobie Brothers, but I'm not sure if they're going to get it. No, I'm sorry. I don't want to get into that little blue-eyed soul. No, we've been doing that stuff.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
But with all due respect to him, once they made the move and got Roquan, like, it changed everything. Patrick Queen looks like a different player. It's almost like he said, hey, little brother, I'm going to take all the stress that you had here. You just go out there, see the ball, hit the ball like they say in baseball. If somebody has it, just run and lay them out. And he's done a better job of being that guy, and he's going to get paid a lot of money in the offseason, not by the Ravens, to be that guy, because they can't pay two off-the-ball linebackers the type of money they paid Roquan. But I think that's where it starts. Like, Roquan had this statement when they were going into Cleveland and said, I want to make them cry in front of their wives and children, talking about the players and their fans. And everybody's like, oh, my God, you gave them bulletin board material. And Roquan said, we play in the NFL. If you need bulletin board material, something's wrong with you. And he said about the Steelers this week. Yeah, he basically said that he doesn't consider himself a Raven until he beats the Steelers this season. And, like, he puts this on his shoulders. But I haven't seen a linebacker like him in this league since – if you want to go Patrick Willis, everybody wants to make the comparison to Ray Lewis here, obviously, but he's great, man. He's fun to watch. If he's on your team, you're going to love him. I'm sure Steeler fans are going to hate him for the next couple of years that he's in Baltimore, but he does make everyone better, and I think everybody feeds off it. And the weird thing is, like, Jadeveon Clowney was talking about him going, he said, I have friends in the league that I played with for a long time, and I've never seen anyone that plays as hard as this guy. So they were trying to bust his chops. Marlon Humphrey had his podcast, Punchline or whatever, and he's up there, and he and Patrick Queen put on their sunglasses on the flight home and just said, we're not talking to you, leave us alone. They're just built different, and I think it starts with those guys up front. The pass rush, we had concerns about it. They're banged up there. There's a bunch of guys that you might call a little bit more tryhards than actual, like, we don't have a TJ Watt just yet. Not many teams do, but they'll devise some schemes to get after it. They'll play some different coverages. And then Kyle Hamilton's kind of an X factor because, thinking about it, there's really not a position for him in the NFL. He's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. And I think McDonald's used him extremely well, and he's been a valuable asset. I think a lot like, I'm not calling him Troy Polamalu, so I don't want anybody to get their feelings hurt or anything, but he does a lot of things that Polamalu did to the Ravens. Like, you saw him coming off the line. You saw some of the tackles he makes. He's great in coverage. He's great in covering tight ends and some of the guys in the slot. He's also great at tackling. So PFF grades him highly. I think he's another guy that you have to look out for.
So you bring up all the weapons in the secondary and second level, and it's just another reason why I would hope the Steelers build the game plan this weekend around the idea of protecting Kenny Pickett and not asking him to do too much, because it sounds like he's going to play. And whether it's Pickett or Trubisky, I don't think it really matters. They ought to lean into their run game because they have yet to really solidly do that this year, a bit in the Vegas game. But all that is a way to ask those guys up front that you talk about, Jeremy. Matabuke, Pierce, Washington. Are they – the Steelers have not been able to get their run game untracked. Is that a worry, I guess, of Ravens fans that maybe finally the Steelers have an opportunity to get things going? Because the defense has been good. The run defense, though, if there's a soft spot in this defense, may be it.
I think that's very fair. When you talk about being able to run on it, like Cleveland really didn't get a chance to show it as much because no Nick Chubb. And with all due respect to the other guys there's a big difference in trying to tackle that guy. And then when you look at some of the other games, like the Colts had their backup running backs, and some of these teams, Joe Mixon was the one guy you could look at, but that offense just couldn't get going. They were just toast. So yeah, I would agree with that the way to attack this team and, the familiarity that these guys have, I do like their pieces up front. They're younger. You mentioned some of the guys. Matabuke's been an absolute beast. Jones. You could talk about a lot of the guys that are there. There's some real talent, but if we were going to talk about something, their depth at cornerback had been an issue, but now getting Humphrey back and the way that Brandon Stevens and some of the other guys have played kind of go, okay, well, the pass defense should be good if they can get to the quarterback. I think the way to attack this team is to try to run the football and set them up with some play action when you can. Because, look, Roquan's a surefire tackler. I don't know if I'm the guy that wants to run it up the middle at that cat, but if I can keep him away from him and set up some other stuff, maybe some counters, different things, and keep him at bay, and maybe even mix in the quarterback running a little bit. And I know with Kenny Pickett's knee issue, like I don't know how much he'd be able to move or how mobile. Trubisky's mobile as well. Maybe you got to use some of that too and work your quarterback in to keep him at bay and change up the defense a little bit. But up front, I would say the way to beat this team is with a strong run game. I just don't know if the Steelers are going to have enough to do that on Sunday. And I just haven't seen enough.
Speaking of run games, let's talk about Baltimore's, because, you know, you have to go without J.K. Dobbins if you're this offense, but you still have some other options. There's Gus Edwards, there's Melvin Gordon, there's Justice Hill. And these guys collectively, we add them all up, they're right about 4 yards a carry between the three of them. So it's not like they're not doing the job. Granted, yes, Lamar is their leading rusher, but it's not like these running backs haven't at least been efficient when getting opportunities. What's it been like watching these guys try to mix these three in and trying to find something that works in conjunction with Lamar doing what he does?
Yeah, with Melvin Gordon, Kenyon Drake, it's a who's who of where did you find these guys? How long have they been on the team? You hit him on the practice squad? What? We can still do that type of thing. And then now, like, Keaton Mitchell's practicing again, who, again, another young guy that I think we're pretty excited about from preseason, thinking that maybe there's some different type of player, but Gus Edwards feels that he could be a guy that plays in this league and contributes. But, yeah, the loss of J.K., like, we were all – the big talk in the offseason was, can they pay J.K. because he wanted to make money? And then he comes out and tears the Achilles after having the knee injuries. I don't know what you do in this situation because he's going to have to sign a prove-it deal to try to come back and get his fifth year and show a team that he can play. But no matter what he does, the 4 years he's been in the league, he's been hurt every single year. So how do you pay that guy? Now, picking up the pieces, Gus Edwards still a guy that averages 5 yards a carry, but he's coming off of an injury, and I think they're bringing him back a little slower than they typically would. Justice Hill's a guy they've had high hopes for, but he's never really been given an opportunity cost there. Like, he doesn't get his 10 or 12 carries a game. Maybe we see a little bit more of that. And I think they just kind of ride the hot hand. That's what I believe is going to happen.
So the other interesting part of the Ravens offense is they try to attack the Steelers, and what has worked and what hasn't worked in the past, Jeremy, is that, like, Mark Edwards has caught a decent number of balls in the games that he's played against the Steelers, but I want to say it's only a little better than 50% on targets to Andrews that have been completed. And I don't know. I don't think he has a receiving touchdown, for example, against the Steelers. And I want to say he had maybe one. Anyway, the point remains, Andrews is another guy who hasn't had huge days against the Steelers, despite the fact that the Steelers traditionally, year after year, get absolutely roasted by tight ends in the middle of the field in coverage. So is there anything to Mark Andrews perhaps having a day where he goes off? I know that traditionally that's the way they get it done, but with Zay Flowers, with the other receivers, it has been diversified a bit in the pass game. What should we expect from Andrews?
Yeah, I mean, another guy like last week, the 2 touchdowns that he had against Cleveland, the one of which I think it had like a 3% chance of being completed as he jumps up over 2 defenders and catches the ball. Like, he's a difference maker. The one thing I've always said when people said, hey, who's going to be the guys getting all the passes? Is it going to be a week-to-week thing? And I said, yeah, I believe it's week-to-week here. But Mark Andrews is the one guy that's always going to eat at the table. I mean, he's always going to get his targets. I think in years past, like, if I were defending the Ravens, I would want to keep Lamar in the pocket, make him a passer, and I'd want to try to take away Mark Andrews as much as I could. I don't think you can double him as much as you'd like to now with the weapons that they have on the outside. And Odell still looks pretty good. Just the big question is, will he stay healthy will he play more games than he doesn't? So I do think you're playing with fire a little bit with that type of thinking, that I want to take Mark Andrews out of it and seeing if the wide receivers can step up. It all depends on how you tackle, because they're going to throw some underneath stuff to Zay. They're going to try to get the ball in his hands. And I mean, we've said it before, like, the guy can make you miss in a telephone booth, and he did that last week. I mean, he gained an extra 4 or 5 yards, but the highlight play of the instep and the jump back was almost as good as Bijan in London, as he stepped left, stepped right, and hey, which way's he going? So I think from an offensive standpoint, Mark Andrews is still a guy you have to acknowledge in the red zone and try to take him away. But Lamar's going to go to these other guys as well. So there's finally weapons there. I think it's the best way to try to beat the Ravens, but I do think you're playing with fire if Lamar's on and he's seeing the field well.
Jeremy, I hate even asking this question under normal circumstances, but given the way these two teams play the games when they face each other, and given whom each team has on each side, you got Justin Tucker on one end and Chris Boswell on the other, and these guys figure into how these games turn out when these two teams face each other. We've seen Justin Tucker used in a lot of different situations for Baltimore, and of course, earlier this season, You saw that game against Indianapolis where things were just it really got down into the muck and got kind of ugly and sloppy, low-scoring game. And these games aren't much different, traditionally speaking, as far as history tells us. Are we looking at another game where, all right, the kickers could be a big part of this, but at the same time, I hate to even say this, but Justin Tucker not looking like Justin Tucker feels weird.
Yeah, I think our expectations of him, he's still the greatest kicker in the history of the league. I've seen that guy do. I mean, it's just unreal. I don't think that he's faded. I don't think he's the one that he tried in the Indy game was a 61-yard field goal that fell about 1.5 yards, 2 yards short, but it was still looked like if you took the goalpost and went like this, it was still going to go down the middle. The guy's just amazing. But I know we're going to get to prediction time, and but when we get to it, I think this is a field goal game. To me, I'll be taking the Steelers plus the points. I would not be shocked if they won the game. And I know that's such a silly thing that people would say, but I think it's the right side. And you, Mac, we've talked handicapping and done gambling together. I mean, this is what I do. I think the Steelers are a live dog this week. I can't give you a great explanation why, but the thing that I always go back to, I had an old co-host that worked for the Baltimore Orioles, and he'd always say, a team, when it gets embarrassed, if it's a good team, they usually bounce back and have a good week. I bet on Cincinnati earlier this year, and they embarrassed me against the Ravens when I said that. And then the Steelers going to Houston, I still don't know what the hell happened in that game, guys, because from a gambling standpoint, it was a great spot for Houston. It really was, for Houston to kind of pull off an upset. But once I heard about their offensive line, I'm going, oh my God, they're going to destroy them. And then I'm watching the game going, do they want to be here? What's happening? So I think they bounce back and have a good game. I just think the Ravens are a really good team. So it wouldn't shock me to see the Ravens go into Pittsburgh and win. But ultimately, I feel like this game's going to be a field goal game either way.
Well, let's get that prediction then, because this is, you lay out all the reasons it makes sense to expect the Steelers to bounce back here, Jeremy, right? Their pride is injured. They're at home underdogs. Another reason to maybe lean on them with the points. And it's a division game too. The rivalry, the way Lamar has played against them in the past. The other side is they're somehow in first place if they win this game, the Steelers, going into their bye week. The other side to that is, well, if they lose this game after everything we just laid out, injured pride, everything that goes with it, Lamar doesn't usually play well against them, especially at Heinz, all of that, then they're really going to be down going into the bye week. And there will be some very difficult questions they should be asking themselves on the coaching staff. So all that laid out as it is, tell me what's the Jeremy Conn, what's the concrete lock style game script for this one? How's it play out?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Ravens 23-20. I think they find a way to win. Here's the deal, though. If the Ravens win this game, I think they grab a kind of a stranglehold over this division. And if you're playing in this division, you're just hoping to get in the playoffs, because that'll be 3 road wins against all the opponents in their division. So beating Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, Cleveland in Cleveland, Cincy in Cincy, and now all those teams have to come to Baltimore. So I think it's a really big uphill battle to try to catch them. And I think the Ravens have a favorable schedule this year. So, I'll say 23-20. And I know when we were talking before, you were telling me, Josh, a big fan of The Wire. I didn't know if you guys wanted any Wire stories before I had to run.
Yes, we need one.
Oh, please.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things one of my co-hosts on the Big Bad Morning Show is Ed Norris, who was a detective on The Wire. The Black Police Commissioner was loosely based upon his life, of some of the things that he went through when he was the Baltimore Police Commissioner. Yeah. So one of my favorite things about it is if you've come to Baltimore, we do have an accent here in Baltimore. They tried it recently in the other series that they had with the police officers. And by the way, the main police officer in that show that John Barenthal played, I grew up with. So we've talked about that before, I believe. And it's just kind of ironic. And I also played football with the guy that arrested him. So it's just really weird. But so they tried doing the Baltimore accent, right? So they did it on the show. And some people were getting upset and thought that they did too much. Like, hey, we're going down to Chaps Pit Beef. We'll get some of that great pit beef there, Con, and all that. They tried that. So they tried to do that with The Wire. They had a test screening of the first episode. And I don't mean this to sound rude or take shots at anyone, but the people came out asking, was there something wrong with the actors? Were they trying to be like special needs because of our accent? And I find that so hilarious, because if you meet a true Baltimorean, with that terrible, terrible accent.
Yeah.
It's like you understand what they're saying. Like we start leaving letters out of words like going to the library, and we change words up. Washington. Why are we putting
Jeremy, we don't know anything about weird accents here in Pittsburgh. What are you talking about? What are you talking about down there?
We talk about how the football teams aren't too different in how they play. The two cities and how they talk.
Not all that
same
different.
also. Not all that different.
We're not putting French fries and sandwiches down here. That's sacrilegious. I want to eat them first. But anyway,
that stays on its own. Like, we can't even defend that part. You're 100% right on that one.
But with the Wire, though, like, what a great series. And the thing that people don't realize is it starts the same way it finishes. Basically saying no matter how much you fight drugs, like eventually it just comes back to the same thing. So if we started a brand new season of the Wire, we would have the Marlos. We would have, all these other guys in there, like just new people just take their place. So once they go down, here comes the next person.
The game is the game.
The game. Yes.
Always.
Thank you, Omar.
I tell people just the thing that sets it apart is the writing itself, because it tells a story, but it continues because it's a story that ends, but everybody knows that nothing ever ends. The story will continue at some point. There is a point where they will move forward. We just don't see it. And the way they wrote it and tied it all together, I'm absolutely in awe of how they put that together. It is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, and I'm not even shy in admitting it. Love it.
Not that it's going to change much, but like the Orioles closer Felix Batista, there was a big push for him to come out to Omar's whistle, and he started doing it, and everybody went nuts. He has no idea what it is. He's coming out now. We don't get to see it for another year. You got to make it down here and hopefully watch out a game they close out when the place goes dark and you hear the whistle and he comes out.
Man,
I'm still of the firm belief, Jeremy, that when Major League Baseball expands, which we all know is going to happen someday, in the next 10 years, and they realign, right? Because they'll realign too and probably do away, as much as some people will hate it, old heads will hate it, they'll do away with AL and NL and probably go geographic. The Orioles and Pirates should be in the same division. Like the geography, the shared history in many cases, and now the similar parallels that both franchises are running, although the Pirates are a few years behind the curve. I would be all for that because, and I think the baseball fans in both towns are very, just the sports fans in both towns. We've talked about this before, off and on air. The sports fans in both towns are so damn similar, live and die with their football teams, and they just want their baseball teams to consistently be good. And they hate the ownership of the ownership of their baseball teams. Yeah. And so, so much of it, above and beyond the silly accents and the colloquial food is so similar. So it's why Pittsburgh and Baltimore, we hate each other, but we hate each other in that brotherly way.
Mutual respect.
And that's how it should be. Like, I was telling my son he wanted to go to some games wearing he's actually a Colts fan, and he wanted to go to that game. And I'm like, dude, don't go to the game wearing you're going to just, if you win, everybody's pissed off coming out, yelling at you. If you lose, they're egging you on the entire time. And I'm sure he would have been better at that. And then he left early in that game when they thought they lost, and then they came back and won. So it's still hilarious to me. But it is. There's a lot of similarities there when you look at our cities and just being blue collar. And I think that's where this rivalry comes in. It's so great. And when they say throughout the records, like, you really do it. Yeah, I mean, throughout the records, like, regardless, I can give you all the X's and O's of why the Ravens should win this game. And I'm not the least bit shocked that the Steelers come out with a victory on Sunday.
Well, Jeremy, we appreciate the time, man. Seriously, thanks for doing it.
Thank you, man.
It is going to be a hell of a game on Sunday. I hope, anyway, because I think if it's close, the Steelers have a chance. But we'll see with Pickett's knee being what it is, and the Ravens getting healthy at just the right time. But thanks again for the time and the insight.
Anytime, guys. I appreciate you having me. It's going to be a blast. So I would say good luck on Sunday, but I hope your team loses. No, I'm kidding. There's all this hatred. I'm supposed to hate you guys. We got somebody that said to me, like, why do you call it Steelers week? I said, because every week's Raven week. Like, it's about who you're playing. Like, that's what we care about.
Here it's Ravens week. That's what we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mike Tomlin calls it Ravens week.
That's
a good time.
It's a part of the rivalry. Jeremy, thanks again, man.
Anytime, guys.
Great stuff with Jeremy Conn, who is going to help us arrange in the offseason for perhaps an entire wire-themed episode of Fourth Down in the Steel City, which I know Josh would be a huge fan of. And I'm currently rewatching the show right now. That's my rewatch right now is The Wire. I'm in the middle of the second season, the docs and all that. So
you're getting into the good stuff.
Yeah.
That's I don't want to get too far off topic, but for true fans of the show understand that season 2 is the thing that connects the whole thing together. Yeah. It is the linchpin. It's 3 through 5 don't make sense without 2. Like it's a novel. The way it's written, it's a novel. You need 2 to get through the rest of the story, and just you got to sit through it because it's great.
It is. It's a fantastic show. So yeah, it's exactly why it could be watched a million times too. And the fact that the Orioles closer comes out to Omar,
I love that.
So badass. I mean, it's the same as David Bednar coming out to Renegade, right? Like a city identifies with a certain something. Baltimore sort of openly puts their arms around the dysfunctional culture that created The Wire, and we here in Pittsburgh, we put our arms around cheesy classic rock.
Classic rock, yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Neither here nor there. Let's build the game plan now. Here on 4th down in the Steel City, where if it's 4th and short, we always go shotgun. And in this case, we will argue against going shotgun, I'm sure, in those situations. Maybe we won't. But building the game plan brought to you by your business here. I'm not even going to limit it anymore to like home improvement and hardware and construction companies and contractors. I don't care. You could be a nail salon for all I care. We're still going to build the game plan and make it look pretty while we do it. Hopefully. I don't know. I have a hard time, Josh, imagining how the Steelers win this one unless it really does stay ugly. Unless Lamar looks like, I guess for lack of a better way to put it, Steelers Lamar. When he plays against the Steelers, he does not play well. More often than not, he doesn't anyway. And I don't know how the transition from Greg Roman to Todd Monken affects Lamar against the Steelers specifically. To be quite honest, watching the way Lamar played against the Browns last Sunday has me worried that he is hitting his stride at just the right time in this Monken offense, that he's starting to put a lot of it together. Again, I'll reference the throw into the corner of the end zone to Mark Andrews against the Browns on Sunday, that when you catch the end zone view of it, I mean, it's just classic Lamar. And that isn't what people think it is. Classic Lamar is not, he's got to bust the pocket and scramble. Classic Lamar is he can do that if he wants to, but instead he's going to use his arm to just flick of the wrist, because he's got a great arm, flick of the wrist on target in the corner of the end zone to a great red zone receiver in Andrews. And that's what worries me the most about this thing, is that the Steelers, after getting torched by CJ Stroud, having the game plan, the blueprint sort of laid by both the Texans and the Niners for how to combat TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith in the pass rush is 1, 2, 3, get it out. The Ravens now have the receiving core, especially now that it's getting healthy again, to do that. I don't know if Lamar Jackson has ever been better equipped to beat the Steelers than he is coming in on Sunday.
When the Ravens signed Odell Beckham, I said, okay, they needed a receiver. You get OBJ, that makes sense.
Yeah.
When the Ravens drafted Zay Flowers,
oh boy,
I was a little bit more worried, because you and I have shared this joke how many times off air, just talking about Pitt, and I'm like, the thing that made Phil Dracovic great is we're number 4 for Baltimore, because at Boston College, 80% or more of the targets he was throwing out in BC's offense were going to Zay Flowers, because Zay Flowers is that good. And now he's in Baltimore with Lamar Jackson, and just to make things even more poignant, they bring in the offensive coordinator from the school that I've been calling the Roman Reigns of college football the last 2 years. And that same guy is the one that was putting together the offense that Broderick Jones and Darnell Washington were playing in a year ago. That says something to me. And I think the grand collection of it all makes it more daunting than just those individual things one at a time. You look at each of those instances, you say, okay, they might get a little bit better, but you put all 3 of those changes together with Lamar Jackson, and it looks a lot better. It makes me think Lamar could be more, reminiscent of Louisville Heisman season Lamar, when he was running Bobby Petrino's offense and putting up the numbers he was putting up. And I have to remind people of this. You can't be a quarterback in college running Bobby Petrino's offense and be thought of as just a running back. That makes absolutely no sense because you're not even stepping under center or in the shotgun if you can't throw in Bobby Petrino's offense. And Lamar made it clear that he could throw that year he won the Heisman. And now he's stepping into an offense that's going to look closer to that and a lot further away than what Greg Roman used to do. And that should give you a lot of pause because part of me thinks that Steelers Lamar was a direct reflection of the offense they ran because it was so heavily dependent upon Lamar's ability to run first, and then his ability to throw was kind of like second or third behind his ability to run and then whoever he was handing the ball off to. Now they're putting his ability to throw out there on Front Street, and you're seeing it up close, and then they're saying, oh yeah, by the way, he can run too. So now you become an even bigger problem if you're Lamar Jackson. That's what scares me about this whole thing.
Yeah, and the other problem is not only are they starting to put it together on the offensive side, but on the defensive side, they look like classic Ravens, and that's been without Marlon Humphrey. So they are top 4 in the league in yards per game, I believe. Let me just double check that number. They're third. Yeah, they are third in the league in yards per game allowed, less than 261 yards a game. That's total 261 yards a game. Passing
and
defense,
3rd points.
Yeah, passing defense 168. So yeah, they're holding opponents under 170 yards passing. The reason I said the rush defense may be if you're looking for a soft spot, maybe that's a soft spot, is because they are only 7th in the league in rush defense.
Only
92.5 yards a game. I don't know. And to your point, 3rd in the league in points per game as well, tied with the Niners, 14.5 points a game.
That should scare you, if nothing else. With this offense, that should bother you.
And so here's the problem. Before we try to build a way for the Steelers to combat all this, here's my worry, is that it all goes wrong on Sunday because this team is not built to come from behind, which brings us to, before we build the Steelers game plan, something Matt Canada said to the TV networks last week, right? He admitted to, in a production meeting, to Adam Archuleta and Spiro Dedes that they're not built to come from behind. Now, he went out of his way. I mean, he backpedaled like Mel Blount in his prime at his meeting with the media on Thursday in trying to clarify what he was talking about. Greg Finley, intrepid producer, if you don't mind playing the clip.
Do you feel like you have the personnel to come from behind when you get behind like 14, 16, nothing?
I'm glad you asked that question because obviously Angela preps me on things. So that is an unbelievable misinterpretation of a conversation. So I'm going to take a real nice time here and explain what that was. Obviously, you guys all know because you know everything about how it works. Pre-game, we talk to those crews, talk about what's going to happen. We try to give them information. The conversation was why we ran more runs and play action against the Raiders versus the opening game. And why was that? As you look at a stat sheet, did it look that way? As you guys all know, the start of that 49er game didn't go the way we planned. Really didn't do anything until we had the 95-yard 2-minute drive. We're down 20-7. So you're down 2 scores. You come back, they score. We had a decent drive there, moving a little bit. Deontay got hurt, as you recall, got down there, got stalled, got a stop, came back again. And the conversation was at that point, I think it was probably 3 minutes and 15 seconds ballpark when we got stopped. At that point in the 3rd quarter, at that point, we're down 3 scores with 3 minutes and 13 seconds to go in the 3rd. 3 scores. You're not going to stick to your running plan and the plan of running play action when you're down 3 scores. All we care about here is winning. So the conversation was at that point, the plan, wasn't built to do that then. You had to go. Obviously, I believe we were going to win till the end. I kept throwing it to the point of our lineman had to do 46 dropbacks. Kenny had to do that. At no point was that conversation meant in that regard. I certainly believe he knew that and obviously was taken wrong if not. But of all the things we want to talk about and say, at no point do I doubt our players, doubt where we are, doubt we can come back. No doubts. I was literally saying any football person would tell you, you're down 3 scores with, 18 minutes to go. You got to start going faster. You got to start being in a 2-minute mode. You have to score more points. That's how that came out, and certainly everybody on the offense is well aware of that.
Matt, your substitution patterns with the back.
All right, so Greg, you can kill it now, because it starts to go into a completely different question there. First and foremost, pardon me. Let's be clear, and we talked about this before we started the show today, Josh. There's nothing that Matt Canada said, either in that production meeting or in that clip right there, that isn't true. Like, they're not built to come from behind.
No.
How many offenses are necessarily built to come from down 3 touchdowns in 18 minutes, as he's
There's
citing
like 2
in the San Francisco game? Right. One of them has a
There's
guy
2
named
in the
Mahomes.
Right.
And yeah, that's the only
The other one
that
has a guy named Allen.
Yeah. Okay. There
That's
we
it.
go. We can
Those are
agree.
the
It's
2.
probably just those 2.
Yeah.
So I don't fault him for being honest, I guess, in a production meeting. And now, was he a little too honest? Probably. I don't fault him for saying, for having that belief in his offense, or lack of belief, I guess I should say. The only problem I have, really, with what Matt Canada said between the production meeting before Sunday's game or in this meeting with the media, is that he's telling you, I'm not running play action once we get down. Now, is there a certain point where he's down double digits, where he's down more than 2 touchdowns, where it's got to be 20, whatever the deficit is, where he says, okay, throw out all the play action passes? I don't necessarily agree with that part of his assessment, because we've talked before, you don't have to be running the ball effectively to run play action effectively. Now, I do understand the concept of play action is they've got to believe the run is a possibility in order to bite on it. I don't like giving up on play action and giving up totally on the run game at that point that he's talking about in the San Francisco game, where he says, I'm down 3 touchdowns with 18 minutes left. I don't totally give up on it. I don't. Maybe that's foolish of me, and my game plan would not be built properly in that case, or my attempt to come back would not be built properly. But I'm still going to keep the opposition honest as long as the clock gives me time to run occasionally, understanding I got to move quickly and put points on the board. I'm still going to do that. And so I'm still going to try to keep that as a possibility. Look, all we're doing here is mincing words, I guess, over what Matt Canada had to say. The greater point here is that they aren't built to come from behind.
No,
they're not. And that I don't think Matt Canada had to tell Adam Archuleta and Spiro Dennis the fact that they're not built to come from behind for everyone in the NFL to know that they're not built to come from behind.
The biggest problem with both the initial discussion and then the defense of the discussion is that we assume, and this is not just a Pittsburgh thing, it's not just a media thing, this is a general human discourse thing. We trap ourselves into the habit that every discussion, everything we talk about is particularly binary, where it is strictly all this or strictly all that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not true. And I agree with you from the standpoint of you don't want to abandon certain things. Like, you don't necessarily want to abandon a run. You don't want to necessarily abandon play action. But you also understand,
I may still
right.
run the occasional first down draw play,
right.
even when I'm down 21, just to keep the defense honest.
But it's also going to be within context. It's going to come within a certain down to distance. It's going to come at a certain point on the field. It's going to come at a certain particular juncture where you know, okay, this is a viable option here that makes sense. You're not going to run on 2nd and 14 from your own 30
Correct.
with 2 minutes left in the third because you think you need to run there. That's not the right down the distance. It's not the right context. It doesn't make sense there. So when you add it all up within reason, and that's something that you have to kind of, asterisk it and put it in the footnote and say within reason, what he's saying makes sense. The problem is we are so heavily, programmed to just make it it's either this or it's not, or we like to take it as, oh, well, why is he saying this? And there are sometimes, and this is just not Matt Canada, this is other coaches, this is other teams, this is other markets, where a coach will say something in context that's actually true. And at that point, we are so far gone that we're just taking it, we're just refuting it out of knee-jerk reaction. Like, we don't know anything else other than to refute the guy. We even saw that the last couple of years of Clint Hurdle. Clint Hurdle can say anything, and it's just like, no, that's not true. And then wait a minute, you're like, oh no, wait, that is kind of true, because we're just so programmed, conditioned to just immediately try to refute it.
Yeah.
And there wasn't much, maybe a few things, like I said, within reason that can be refuted. The rest of it's true. And I've been through some of those situations where, even recently, I'll tell this story recently. Did a couple high school games the past few weeks where we talked to coaches before games, and there was a coach in particular that was talking about some elements of his offense that he were like, man, this is so bad. He's like, man, we're so bad at this one thing. But I'm not going to mention that in the broadcast.
Yeah.
I understood what he meant in a general sense. He's talking about, hey, if we have to do this particular thing in this moment, it's not going to work. If we're going to do this, we got to do this at this particular time. Otherwise, we're going to be in bad shape because we're not built to be able to do that with this particular personnel. I really think that's what that was the whole crux of that was. But when you take it out of context and you drop it into a binary setting, it's going to sound way worse than what it is.
It's also a little bit of a sellout move by Archuleta. Was it Archuleta or Dennis? I can't remember who mentioned it.
It might have been the combination of the two. And I kind of look at the broadcaster on that, and I'm going, okay.
You're not supposed to put it that way.
You're not supposed to put it that way. Plus, there is a certain trust that you build there with coaches sharing you information.
Right.
And you might have made that harder for coaches to trust you down the road. I saw a really big problem with that, because all they had
to say, Josh, was, hey, the Steelers are not built to come from behind.
Right.
And that would have been that. And everybody would have agreed with it. Right.
No one would have argued, because they see the personnel. They know they don't have their best route runner. Everyone sees it, and everyone who's watched this team enough times to knows that. It just, there's a line you walk with information that you get and how well you disseminate it. And I'll come back to this. These coaches don't have to give you information. How much should we talk about this? They don't owe us this stuff. They don't have to give it to us. They can give us the smallest, most basic, I'll give you this so you go away information, and it can be totally different from what you see. Right. And honestly, they'd be well within their right, because they're giving you information that they don't really want to share. Coaches are very guarded with stuff because they don't want to think that they're giving someone else an edge. Granted, yes, it's incredibly paranoid, but that's how they operate. But when you're given the opportunity to get that information and it's passed along to you in a confidential and more of an off-the-record setting, you got to be more responsible with how you handle the information and how you disseminate it. And I think there was a bit of a fumbling of that situation there.
All of this is not to say that Matt Canada, again, was wrong. He's not wrong. And
no, he's right. He's telling the truth.
As we look at
maybe too much truth.
Yeah. As we look at avenues for the Steelers to win this game, it's why, like I said to Jeremy Conn earlier, they have to lean on the run game to somehow suck the life out of this game, literally drag it down into the mud, hope that they can put together a drive finally, because they've really only put together one drive all season that ended in a touchdown anyway. Put together a drive or two that end, at least one of them has to end in a touchdown, and just get this game to halftime up 3 or tied 10-7. Get it to halftime at 10-7, or hell, I'll even take 7-3, right? Or 7-7. Don't let Baltimore get a touchdown lead or more, because at that point, this thing is going to start to get away from them. And again, that's why if I'm Matt Canada building the game plan for this weekend in particular, I am leaning on the run game. I am doing all of the little traps and counters inside that we saw work against Houston. That's where this run game is going this week for me. I'm going to pull my guards. I'm going to do everything I can to funnel things into the inside lanes and try to, because as much as we want to avoid the inside linebackers, I'm also not asking my offensive line in this case to do any kind of zone blocking on the outside, because they've shown they can't do it. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to get tricky with the run game, and it's going to be trap city, and it's going to be counter city, and it's going to be Najee. You're going to have to gain 2-3 yards, and then pray to God you can break some Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen tackles.
There's two things I need to say to this. And the first one is that I agree with everything you just said wholeheartedly, because that's the only way, in my opinion, that they win this game.
Mm-hmm.
It just so happens that's how they're built to be anyway.
It's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be.
That's the crazy part. That's how they're built to be. And I'm going to come back to this again, like I did post-game after the Houston game, and like we did in our post-game show. This is what they told us they wanted to become as a team. This was the type of identity they wanted to have. Now, here's the weird part. They weren't playing the guys that were supposed to be part of this identity they were building in the first 4 games of the season. Now they're forced to. Now they're forced to play Darnell Washington because Pat Freiermuth is out. Now they're forced to play Broderick Jones because Dan Moore is out. Now they have to go that route. And it seems like they're forced to do that with Keanu Benton because of the situation there. And I think Mike Tomlin realizes, hey, we got to give this kid more snaps because he's actually playing near the guys up front. So I say all that to say, I have to agree with this because that's what you say you want to do. So now you're almost forced into the position to do what you say you're going to do. Here's a fun part that I think people who like to criticize Mike Tomlin, you're missing out on a prime opportunity to lay your biggest criticism of him out there. He told you what he wanted to do, and he's not doing what he told you what he wanted to do. And everybody's swinging and missing on that part.
Yeah, letting it slide.
Now you're forced to actually be this. And if it doesn't happen, now you got it teed up for you. Now you got the teed up thing of, hey, you said you wanted to be this team, and now you're not this team. Why? That's the first thing I'm going to say. The second thing I'm going to say is, Chris, you said a lot of stuff that sounds a lot like what I said that they needed to do and avoid before they played San Francisco. Remember when I told you if this team gets down by a couple possessions against San Francisco, I'm very, very terrified for Kenny Pickett because it's going to be a long afternoon. And what exactly happened? They got down by 3 scores and it became a long afternoon. So I say all that to say this. Should you really be shocked at what Matt Canada said when we told you it was coming? No, you shouldn't be. And you should not be surprised at the thought of this becoming a distinct possibility. Not only from the offensive side of things, but for the defense as well. Why? Because we just saw it again against Houston. This defense played 41 snaps in the first half against Houston because the offense couldn't do anything and they couldn't generate anything on their side of the ball. You are looking at that again now if your offense can do this. And we just talked about how different this Baltimore offense is with Lamar Jackson being able to throw it in short yardage with Zay Flowers, being able to go down the field, having Odell Beckham Jr. healthy, and possibly having a healthy offensive line. And now we know what teams can do to try to offset this pair of edge rushers. You better figure it out on offense. You better be able to control the ball. You better be able to control the clock. And even if you don't score, you better be able to get drives that sustain yardage and keep the drive alive. Because if you don't, and you give this team more time and more opportunities, they're going to wear your defense down. And in a game like this, which is historically physical and bodies get carted off, usually in multiples, probably in the half dozens or so, if not more, this is the game where you cannot do what you did against San Francisco and you cannot do what you did against Houston.
The thing that worries me about the other side of the ball, Josh, that you started to lay out, is yards after the catch have been really important. And we've seen the Steelers tackling in the secondary be atrocious. Ooh. And Zay Flowers, 115 of his 244 receiving yards, so more than half after the catch. He's top 20 in the league in that regard. It's just shy of what George Pickens has done after the catch. And we know how combustible he is after the catch, how he can take a ball, turn it upfield, and go. We've seen him do it. It's not quite Nico Collins-esque, who now leads the league in yards after the catch, thanks to his performance this past Sunday. But it is something to worry about with Patrick Peterson and Levi Wallace already being porous in coverage. You add in that second layer of, the tackling ain't great either. All it takes is one missed tackle. Zay Flowers is going to turn 6 or 7 yards into 20. Zay Flowers is going to turn 12, 13, 14 yards on a deeper route into 30 or 40, or even worse, a score. It's why
he could break tackles to get there. Mike Tomlin
Right.
talked about how tough he is and how he's not intimidating. He doesn't mind someone coming trying to knock his head off. He will take that hit and try to break that tackle.
And now you've got that working on the outside in tandem with, again, I know he hasn't done it in the past, but this is Todd Monken's offense, not Greg Roman's offense. Mark Andrews working on the inside.
And you saw what he did with Brock Bowers at Georgia.
Yeah. So
Why did
imagine.
Darno catch so many passes at Georgia? Because he had Brock Bowers, folks.
Right.
That's why.
And
That's
what
why.
does, if you took Brock Bowers out of a Georgia Bulldogs uniform and put him in purple and black,
He
guess
might
what?
look a lot like Mark Andrews.
It might look a whole hell of a lot like Mark Andrews.
I
So
totally agree. Now, I'll add one more point to this because I think it's
Mhm.
really important. And I think the Steelers' defense has been a really good measuring stick or guinea pig to kind of, exemplify this. Brooke Pryor wrote a really good piece about how the league is not really a chuck it down the field kind of
No.
league anymore. It is more short yardage, catch passes in space, yards after the catch. But here's the thing. This isn't that surprising because let's talk about one or two particular different points in history. One was right around late 70s, early 80s. There was an offense that really rose to prominence that became really popular because its whole hook was, hey, you can control the ball with the passing game as much as the run game by throwing it in short distances, timing it well, getting receivers in space and allowing them to get extra yardage. So at the very least, you're still moving the ball, but at the best case scenario, you might break a tackle and get bigger yardage. That offense was called the West Coast offense. It was one of the bigger influences for another offense that became bigger later on down the line that also specified with, hey, an emphasis on throwing to wide open receivers, an emphasis on catching the ball in space and getting the most and getting upfield and getting yardage, and also doing it in a very short amount of time. And that offense was called the air raid. And a lot of what you see with modern offenses now, they are taking pieces from both offenses and incorporating it and sprinkling a little bit of BYU with Lavelle Edwards, which, by the way, the preeminent coach in the league also played in G8 for that guy and Andy Reid. So there's that. But that's what the league, as far as offenses in the passing game, has really started to lean on. And you're seeing the benefits of it. And this defense is being really, really leveraged on it. And it could happen again.
And what did Lamar play in at Louisville?
Well, he played in Bobby Petrino's offense, but it wasn't too different as far as taking advantage of getting the ball in space and short yardage and turning it into big gains. It was also a lot of that influence, too, with Bobby Petrino's team.
Exactly.
So nothing changes there.
He can do it.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if that's how they build their game plan, the Ravens, for Sunday. All of this is to say, I'm worried, friends. I feel like the Kermit the Frog meme. I'm biting my nails. I'm very, very concerned about Sunday afternoon, regardless of whether it's Kenny Pickett or Mitch Trubisky. I'm more worried if it's Pickett because I worry that much like when he played a game. Oh, and who made the point of pointing this out? And I cited it. Oh, Amanda Godsey, who covers has covered Pitt in the past and covers the Steelers now. She tweeted this Wednesday afternoon. Reading that Kenny Pickett is in a knee brace reminds me of when Pat Narduzzi had him wearing one on his plant leg during practice and games as a precautionary measure. Pickett didn't wear one for a game against Georgia Tech in 2018 and had his plant leg bent backwards. The one thing that I still need to see the rest of the season, whether the Steelers win every game or lose every game from here on out, Josh, is I need to see Pickett play when healthy so that we get an idea of whether this development has already hit its ceiling or there's a little more room to grow. Canada, the OC, or not. If Pickett is hurt to the extent he's going to miss multiple weeks and then still be less than 100% when he gets back, we're not going to have any further idea of whether the last 8-9 weeks in 2022 were an anomaly or the start of something. And so I'll stand by it. I don't want Kenny Pickett playing this weekend, and I don't want him playing again until he's really ready and able to, because A, it affects him mentally, not being 100%, and already rushing through his progressions and his reads, but then physically, the potential exists for him to be affected as well. So he's probably going to play. It's probably not going to go well. And the Steelers are going to be a mess going into the bye week. But we'll save predictions for our hot sheet episode, our pick'em episode, which will be coming out tomorrow, or maybe has already come out, depending on how you get it. We appreciate you getting Fourth Down in the Steel City, whether you're watching the video here on 93.7 The Fan's YouTube page or listening inside whatever app you get your podcasts via Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, SoundCloud, of course, iTunes, and your free Odyssey app, AUDACY. We appreciate you hanging with us to build the game plan and to hear from Jeremy Conn of 105.7 The Fan and the Big Bad Morning Show in Baltimore. For Josh Taylor and our intrepid producer, Greg Finley, be sure to catch the Pick'em episode this weekend, and we will be back with a post-game episode after Steelers and Ravens, and to get you ready for the bye week, whatever may be coming, barreling straight at us after this Ravens game on the next edition of Fourth Down in the Steel City.